Okay, we're going to start. Welcome to this Ask the Industry Experts panel on charting a course for AI-based solution adoption. So, and this is course 2015S. So my name is Kathy Andriole, and I am from Brigham and Women's Department of Radiology, and also from the Massachusetts General Hospital and Brigham and Women's Hospital Center for Clinical Data Science, where we're developing machine learning models, testing, validating, and implementing them clinically. But today we're going to talk about how people do that outside of the academic environment and how they help us do it inside of our environment. So we're going to hear expert insights from these industry folks about what they see as trends for how AI-based applications can be adopted really into the imaging workflow. I'm going to ask each panelist to go ahead and introduce themselves. So, Mr. Borden, please.
Yes, thanks, Kathy. Kevin Borden, Konica Minolta, VP of Product, Pure Product Healthcare IT. I've been working here for about 12 years now. So anything from healthcare to PACS to risk, billing, AI, obviously, that's why we're here. It's what I do.
Dr. Ahmed.
Thank you so much for the opportunity today. I'm with ACFA Healthcare, the Chief Medical Officer and Global Director for Innovation and AI. Been in the industry for over 24, 25 years now, bringing the clinical expertise and some of the IT learnings that we are taking. Thank you.
Dr. Gupta.
Yeah, hi everybody. My name's Tanuj Gupta. I'm with Philips. I lead their AI and data management and interop businesses. I am 8 months into this industry, so I'm brand new to this industry. But I came from Cerner Corporation where I led AI over there. I'm excited to be talking about applications of AI in imaging, so I think it'll be fun today.
And Dr. Panter.
Thank you. My name is Ben Panter. I'm the founder and CEO of Blackford Analysis. We help you to navigate the AI market, to measure the benefit of AI in your practice, and to deliver those benefits at scale.
Great. So we have some multidisciplinary expertise on the panel, which is fantastic. So first question, and I'm going to ask each of you to answer each question, and we'll have time towards the end for folks in present and online virtual to ask questions of the panelists. So, you know, we know we have standalone applications right now, predominantly, but what are some of the ways that you see that we can have solutions integrated into the point of care systems that folks are using? And as you talk about them, can you point out to us what are some of the pluses and minuses that you see of the different ways that we can do that? And Kevin, could I get your opinion?
Of course. No, great question. You know, being a solutions provider in the software piece, right, and the suite of radiology, I think intuitively ease of use for the end user is important. And that's why we feel integration, seamless integration, not separate workstations, things like that, do allow you to be more efficient. Now, there are benefits of having separate workstations, that model, or separate ways to process images, things like that. But the viewing experience at the end is nice to be in a consolidated place seamlessly.
Fantastic. And Dr.
I'll build onto the comment, because what we're seeing is the desire from the radiologist and the clinical community to move away from that swivel chair concept, where you have multiple AI applications or workstations. You go from one station to the other, you push and pull the data. So that is transforming more towards automation. And with automation, you need, there is a desire to bring some more intelligence as well in terms of how you are reading information. I'll give you one example. For instance, there is now more desire to look into even the work list in a more intelligent way, instead of radiologists going and picking and choosing what exams are in their work list for that day. There needs to be some intelligence in terms of, based on the schedule of a particular department today, or who's reading what exams, the system should be able to guide the readers and readers into picking and choosing those exams. So cherry picking kind of going away. But you know, there are multiple aspects in terms of these use cases, which we can discuss further.
Fantastic. Dr. Gupta.
Yeah, so I'll give you a little bit of a, I guess, product development standpoint. So I think what the AI does helps us think about where to integrate. And we've been thinking about 3 different places to integrate. So one is in the modality itself. And if this is AI that is enhancing the image or speeding up the acquisition of the image, that makes sense. In the viewer, we think about AI that is highlighting certain areas of interest or providing measurements, anatomical measurements. We feel like that should be in the viewer. And then there's some workflow pieces. So if you've got AI that's helping you with no-show prediction or scheduling or automated tasks, like you mentioned, report generation, then you would go to the workflows. And there's stuff in the EHR world that relate tangentially. So if you're placing orders for X-ray images, radiology images, then there could be some things out in that space as well. So I think it's really what the AI does that tells you where it should integrate.
Excellent. So we're hearing we've got standalone, we've got integrated in the PACS if it's sort of a clinical decision support for the radiologist. We've got back office, we've got reporting systems. What about, Ben, I'm going to ask you to address, what about if we have an aggregated collection of solutions that are on a shared platform or marketplace?
It's very interesting you asked me that question. So I would say that all the comments previously absolutely spot on. But what it comes down to me is that if you think about trying to drive all the interactions throughout the radiology area and think about where the value can be delivered downstream, where on the modality upstream you might be doing quality and things like that, I think that you've got to have a system that can orchestrate all of these different elements. And the reality is that in the vast majority of environments, these are not single vendor environments. So you need to be able to deal with the workloads from one entity, the PACS from another, reporting from another. You've got to be able to make sure that those results are going into the EMR. If there's a clinical communication system, that you're integrating into that. I think that the key is the integration, and it's not just integration into what the radiologist is doing. It's trying to drive value from the entire process.
No, that's a great comment. Sort of orchestration throughout the whole imaging chain, if you will. So if I have a stroke detection model and I have it in my scanner, and then I'm going to send the results of the scanner to my model, I need to know what series or sequence the model was built to work on. So that needs an orchestrator and so on. So very important points. And how will people do this at their site if they're not, so excited about or so keen on doing it themselves? How do we make this happen for people clinically?
I mean, from my perspective, there's so many small solutions that you need to try and combine to answer all the challenges of a radiology department, right? There's some big obvious ones. Stroke care coordination, you brought that up, that's a perfect example. But there's not much that's at that scale that can justify the cost of a deployment of a product into an environment, right? So our customers tell us that the internal cost, the unexpressed cost, is about $35K per software deployment they do once you've gone through that whole process. And referencing your original question, a platform basically takes that cost down to effectively zero. You've still got to deploy the platform the first time off, but then you've got the flexibility to be able to chop and change and add more as you go on.
Fantastic. So I know this is a question that people don't like, but I think it's important to ask, and that is, what integration standards and orchestration profiles do you think are important that, much like DICOM was able to enable us to acquire imaging from different vendors and display on other vendors' PACS and visualization systems. What about these different standards for integration? So, Dr. Ahmed.
A very good question. And this has actually come up in the last few years when developers or early adopters started implementing AI systems. The challenge initially that we witnessed was that some of these AI data sets that were being generated were proprietary in nature. And eventually what we saw was the implementation of IHE, DICOM, HL7, some of these technologies, DICOM SR objects, DICOM secondary capture. which made the integration into your existing ecosystem very useful for radiologists. Now, the reason I use the terminology ecosystem is because that's what we hear from users. They tell you, whatever the AI, cloud may be a delivery platform or an AI or app store or marketplace, but make it work in my ecosystem. I use my PACS, my enterprise imaging solution, and these results should be integrated seamlessly. That kind of helps also in terms of, use cases, productivity, and how do you assess and integrate the data. So that's where we saw the transition initially from, being the challenge of integrating proprietary data sets, in certain cases, image captures and PNG or JPEG objects as well. So that while we transitioned out, so when you implement DICOM standards and use HL7, the users then come up with more, asks in regards to what they're learning with. And then the question is, if I do not agree with the specific results of an AI algorithm, and if I'm providing interactive feedback, how do we audit and how do we track? So then there are other IHE profiles in terms of audit logs, in terms of how you track that. So I think there is good transition taking place in the industry as well, in terms of how early adopters have adopted this technology, the provider feedback that they're giving us in terms of integration layers, and also from a cloud perspective, because cloud, I would say a platform is a vehicle in terms of how you deploy these AI algorithms. How do you integrate is then what it comes to, whether it's on-premise or off-premise, is these features in terms of how you facilitate the data and provide dashboards in terms of visibility. One aspect I can give you in terms of integration is if you're able to read into the metadata that these AI algorithms are generating, and if AI fails to process a particular scan, how does a user know that the scan that I'm looking at is not processed? So these are some of the audit trails and integration aspects that the user have started asking us now in terms of the dashboards and analytics that we could provide.
Fantastic. So, Mr. Borden.
A perfect answer there. I do believe the ecosystem is important, right? How does it fit into the ecosystem? A couple of key points, right? Delivery model, the vehicle for delivery. Having a system, a platform, a solution to deliver that makes things easier. Now, standardization, of course, in any type of the industry, whether it be HL7, DICOM, these things, or it could be a new standard that comes out to give you a deeper level of interoperability or integration. As with standard DICOM, it happens, right? Or HL7, you are limited to what you can do in terms of if I want to make changes once the algorithm's already been processed and I get those data sets back, what happens? All the audits, right? What do I want to do with the advanced processing? We try to look for more advanced integrations, right? Can we abide by the standard? Of course. Is there a standard? Not always. What can we do to try to standardize it, one, for our customers, but also moving forward in the industry so we can rinse and repeat that every single time we do it? But there is there are issues when it's just standard integration. You may lose a little bit deep level of detail in terms of being able to do advanced things that you can do with just by getting a screen capture or an image, right? If you need to make changes to the algorithm on the fly.
Yeah, I'm going to pull into my electronic health record experience here, because I thought when I came to this industry, this would be an easier problem here, the standards and the interoperability. And I may or may not be, I don't know. But we used to think of 3 levels of interoperability on the EHR side. So the foundational, structural, and semantic. So, and we typically used HL7 and FHIR for the first 2 to make sure we can exchange the data and that there was some structure to the data we were exchanging. But there was no real solution for us on the semantic side. So we invested a lot as a company on that semantic side. So when I say semantic, I mean, when you see the word penicillin flowing through your system, it needs to know context. Is it in the context of allergy? Then I need severity information only. And if it's in the context of drug, I need dosage and frequency. So you need terminology and you need ontology to do that. So now we come to the imaging side, and I think it's the same levels of interoperability. It looks like HL7 and DICOM important for those to work together. And we've been working on solutions also to put those together to say, hey, if the exam is ordered, the patient arrives, take all that HL7 data, combine it with the DICOM information. And then once you get the image acquired and it's in the PACS and you start getting into the report, that's all useful to have all together in some system to study. I don't know if there's a semantic problem in imaging or not. At first I thought maybe not. I don't know if you have terminologies and ontologies
So
here.
we do.
Do you? Okay.
Yes. So I was going to mention, and we don't have a reporting company on the panel,
Okay.
but there are reporting standards. There's a lexicon called RADLEX.
Okay. Yeah.
Because the general, NIH lexicon for medical terminology did not accommodate
Okay.
many of the terminologies that we use in radiology. So RADLEX is what most people feel covers those additional things. And things like common data elements is another sort of process that people are following today and starting to follow, where we can codify some of the things that come in the report, even things like quantitative metrics that are often just a screen capture. And I would encourage you, just a plug for RSNA here. Last year, we did do something called the Imaging AI in Practice, the IAIP demonstration, and your companies did participate. We're doing it again this year, where we asked them to meet these standards of HL7 Fire, DICOM, IHE, SOL, and so on, and they go through the IHE Connectathon and so on, using a sort of a mock-up clinical scenario, but companies actually interconnected, and we had 22 of you all, and all of you were represented. But I think part of it is industry has to work with us to figure out what are the missing pieces as well. You mentioned that there are missing pieces and limitations if you strictly follow the standards. I think if we follow the standards to a point, what additional things do we need to do the standards? Because these are dynamically evolving standards in general. Yeah.
I echo all the comments about the importance of standards and the value that they can bring, both in terms of feeding AI better quality information. There's only so much you can do with the pixels. If you can get the health record of the patient, you're able to a huge amount more. Downstream, being able to be interoperable with all the other different systems in radiology, and downstream into the referring physician, into the health system, into the financial systems of the health system, absolutely critical. But the key thing about a standard is that it has to be adopted. And an evolving vendor like Blackford can adopt all the standards we like, but fundamentally it's the large OEMs that need to be adopting the whole of the DICOM standard, not little bits and pieces. Yeah. And a lot of our work is about trying to fill in the gaps where different interpretations have been done. Kind of where the IHE standards are meant to supplement the DICOM stuff. But I think that the challenge for any of these standards is getting adoption. And that allows so much more fluidity throughout the whole of healthcare, and we're not there yet. No, and that has to be the mission, and it's kind of, and sorry guys, on you.
Yeah, no, that's the mission. That's really one of the purposes of the demo that we're doing through the RSNA, and very excited about the participation. It's a team sport. It's got to include our end users, our radiologists who are involved in the demo, and our industry partners who make this happen at scale for us. So very, very important piece. Yes.
I was just going to just sort of cap that I agree with you 100%. And I feel like it's not so dissimilar out here in imaging either. So I think similar problems to what we saw on the patient record side.
So I'm going to ask the question that's on every CFO's mind here. Who pays for this? Who pays for AI? Can we start with Dr. Gupta?
Who pays? That's a good question. I want the answer to that question because I think that's going to open up this industry. So I think to me, the big thing everybody's waiting for is reimbursement, especially for clinical AI that's assisting with diagnosis. And we see signs that it's starting to come. There's one or two that are breaking through. But once that happens, then there's a mechanism to pay for it. I think there's a lot of analogies to the drug industry. You may even have the need of cost control within a health system. You may have AI formularies that come up to do that, but I think the whole industry will explode. I think the other aspect of insurance is potentially malpractice. Maybe there's a way to underwrite. And we saw this willingness to pay from malpractice insurance companies in the voice technology on the EHR side, which is if you can show that you reduce your malpractice rate, they'll pay for it for certain specialties. And so in this case, if I have AI as a second read, and I have process in place for the times when the AI and the reader disagree, then that may be a mechanism. I think to get the health system to pay, you really have to show ROI. And I know we've had some conversations on how you guys do that, but you have to show either that you are reducing labor in some way, burden from the care team. So either you're speeding up their time or you're removing tasks from them on what they can do by auto-generating reports, stuff like that. So some level of that, and this one is tougher to swallow, but it is being watched in lots of spaces, which is moving work from specialists to generalists if possible. So for example, with chest x-rays, we had some conversations on the floor today. If there's a certain number of chest x-rays we don't have to read, that's the most ordered image, then that will save everybody time. There's some work shifted out. So I think in the EHR world, we used to talk about nursing ratios. Can we move the nursing ratios from 1 nurse to 5 patients to 1 nurse to 6? And what tech can get us to do that? So I think it's got to demonstrate something like that for payment.
Ben, let's hear some of your conversations with
Yeah,
Dr.
sure.
Gupta. So, I mean, can we do this without reimbursement?
Yes, absolutely. So we are already making sales of AI products. There is virtually no reimbursement available for it. That is a reality. So I guess I see the world similarly, but I change the segments a little. So within radiology, it's a fairly straightforward algorithm, if you like. Can we increase productivity? Can we increase throughput through the modality? Now, then you can do the maths and you can work out what that's worth, and you share the benefit between whoever's building that algorithm, however it's getting to the clinician and the technical fee, the professional, whatever it is. You can do that kind of thing, but there isn't a huge budget available for that kind of activity, right? Radiology is not a high margin game. Now, the place where we're seeing real excitement is downstream in adding value for the referrer. So doing something that could not normally be delivered by the radiology department and delivering that value into the referrer, into neurology, into oncology. Now there, how do you get someone to pay for that? In a private practice, it's around the quality and competition. So we're giving a better job to that referrer. Therefore, we're going to be attracting higher volumes of these high value MR studies. And you can pull together the argument like that. You can look at things like triage, where there's an internal radiology benefit of getting better turnaround times, of fewer misses, but there's also a downstream benefit of, how do you optimize throughput from the ED? How do you make sure that you're catching things and, again, reducing the overall cost of care downstream? Now, the place where I think is really exciting is looking out at the wider health system and payer gains. And really, that's where reimbursement comes together. But reimbursement is a long, slow walk to get to that point, right? And we see companies like HeartFlow or Perspectum that are really investing heavily in the clinical validation because they found a solution that has massive value for the health system, but it isn't economical to deploy right now. And that's where reimbursement comes in. And you can go the very expensive route of lots of clinical trials, lots of evidence cases, lobbying all the payers. You can look at other scenarios. So, for example, the low-dose lung cancer screening experience 5-6 years ago, where visionary clinicians in providers who really wanted to make a difference looked at how they could do this without reimbursement, looking at the downstream value for the pulmonology department, for the oncology department, and trying to make the internal value proposition like that. And that didn't require hundreds of millions of dollars worth of lobbying. And it makes products that are far more accessible to a general radiology environment. And I think that we need to get mechanisms like that in place that, reimbursement follows, but reimbursement is just the kind of endpoint of trying to prove value within a health system.
Can you give me an example of what do you mean by downstream benefit? Do you mean a clinically actionable finding? Do you mean quantitative metrics? Do you mean finding an incidental finding like abdominal aortic aneurysm that you might not detect otherwise? Is that the kind of thing?
I think those are all great examples. The kind of one that I typically go to is looking at MS plaque characterization, right? You could do it as a radiologist if you could afford to spend 45 minutes detailing every single lesion and calculating the size and the overall burden and looking at the effect of that over time. Or you could feed it to an AI, you could look at the result and think, yep, I agree with this. You can satisfy yourself that that particular product is doing the right thing by the literature. And then you're giving the neurologist a much better tool to be able to determine whether the patient is on the correct disease-modifying therapy. And that's what I would say about downstream value. And who pays for that? Well, if you can prove that you're doing better quality of care to the patient, and you can prove that to the patient, you might increase that patient population. The reimbursement associated with an MS patient is something like $45,000 a year for the hospital health system. So trying to capture that's how you start to put those things together.
Or even doing a new exam that maybe you didn't do. Kevin.
I do think all good answers, right, and all good points of view, right? And I do think that it's not necessarily who will pay for. I think the end game is there. I think there will be reimbursement from insurance companies and CMS, things like that. But it's not just that. We'll have value in applications or AI that probably won't ever be reimbursed, right? So what do you do? It's not who will pay for it, it's what are you willing to pay for, right? Does it add value? Does it add value to what I'm doing today? You take it from full end to end, from front end scheduling down to billing, right? What can I do? How can I reduce the tasks I'm doing manually and having to have staff to do that by maybe half or a quarter, right? That adds value. That adds an ROI that they are able to see, especially in today's time. Staff shortages is a big problem, right? How do you do something that you had to have many members of your team doing and automate that? Not just imaging, not just reading, right? Follow-up tasks, right? Follow-up for patients, things that happen. So we look at it like that. If it adds value, right, the industry is going to buy into it. What can you do and who will pay for it?
All valid points, so I won't repeat, but what we have learned is, yes, irrespective of whether there's reimbursement or not, there are providers in the US globally who are subscribing to these AI solutions and innovations. But what have we learned over the last few years when we began implementing? You have today a lot of retrospective data in regards to how an AI algorithm works, the sensitivity, specificity. Where the regulatory bodies have helped is in terms of the intended use of that application. Now, if you can build a business case around the retrospective studies and data that's available, that's what the clinical audience we have now seen have been requesting over the last couple of years. So when we moved out of this hype around AI, if it will work or not, and more clinical studies and peer-reviewed publications came out, the end users started asking us, okay, what does it mean for me? I have no funding, but prove it to me in terms of a business case. Now, it varied in different geographies. In the UK, for example, NHS, they had launched their NHS innovation program. So they were funding the hospitals to improve adoption of these technologies. So they gave them funding for 3 years, acquire the required technology, build the business case. So that's how we got engaged with some hospitals in the in the UK. It's a different story here in the US. It varies between different market segments here. The academic institutes, the early adopters, they are the ones who are heavily investing in this. What are they asking us? What they want to see is, we spoke about the productivity aspect, we spoke about, the clinical programs. Where I see value in implementing this and is the clinical program that you're trying to improve. That's where
I
all gone.
think we have lost the audio.
There's
Hello, hello.
outage, I think.
Everything.
Yeah.
It's dead.
Hold on, everyone.
There we
We're
go.
back.
Yeah.
Sorry.
We need an AI to predict that this will be going
gonna
down.
be-
So the clinical program and clinical efficiencies, right? So what we have done with some of the early adopters and upon their request is, okay, this is the intended use and this is what you're predicting, that there will be 30% improvement in productivity, early detection. How can we demonstrate this before I invest? So there is obviously a trial phase where you implement the solution and you define certain quality metrics and KPIs. And once you demonstrate, that helps the hospitals or providers to build the business case for their CFOs that this is the investment we are making and these are the clinical benefits. So early detection, during the pandemic, I was surprised because most of the AI implementation conversations we had were during the peak of the pandemic. And one of the simple use case that came to us was a lot of chest CTs were being done for, COVID screening. and there were incidental nodule findings as well. And that's where the business case became very tangible, because you do not want to be in a situation where you're looking for a different clinical manifestation and there is something else going on with the patient. So that's one aspect. The other aspect is obviously, I look at medical imaging workflows in three different scenarios. There is the pre-acquisition, there is the acquisition, and post-acquisition. Most of the work that we are witnessing in AI is radiomics and post-acquisition, or at the point of care in modality as well. So there is a return, there is a business case for return of investment, certain cases where mobility is required. So you have AI implemented on point of care acquisition devices, where it makes remote reading and remote assessment and evaluation easier. Then there is the other aspect in regards to reporting and how that functionality can help. Teleradiology solution providers, that's where another business case interactions we've had, where for them volume is important. So the more they are productive in terms of automating some of their tasks, the more volume they're ingesting. So it's a balance that we need to find between the clinical and the business case.
And I would argue, I'll be devil's advocate here, that you need to meet more than one constituent. So I'll give you an example. As we were implementing our stroke suite, and the idea here is to create a smart scanner by putting the model into the CT and into the MR scanner, our thought was, this is great. Notify the radiologist and page the stroke team immediately. That's the priority. But the ED doc said to us, no. Tell us the normals so we can release the bed. So we have multiple constituents who we need to accommodate using these tools, and we have to think about and gather everyone that's touched by this problem and the end team and get them involved. So great.
I'll add on to that as well, because there was, without naming the brand, but it's a similar use case. It was implemented in a particular region or a country on a national program, and it was sold to the clinicians, ignoring the radiology department. So that's where I agree with you, absolutely. There is a collaborative effort that is required between the clinical team leaders, because it is in the end about patient pathway. So which particular aspect of patient pathway, and I've heard recently here in the US, FDA has also come up with certain requirements in terms of these use cases, what clinical input is required.
And I will just add and admit here that in academia, we've done a horrible job of showing outcomes and return on investment. And I think that's something that the researchers in the audience, please start to think about how we show this. You look like you have a response.
Yeah, sure. So I was just going to kind of follow on from the statement about trying to measure the benefit through a trial, and join that in with your comment, Kathy, about the unexpected kind of side effects, right? So I guess a year ago I was thinking, we've got this big portfolio, but there's going to be some winners in that portfolio. I'm just going to find out which these winners are. But actually, the experience over the last couple of years has been completely different. That we can deploy a product into different environments, and have completely different responses. One site thinks it's absolutely fantastic, it solves every problem. One, I'm not going to give you the quote, but it was the only thing that this was good for was wasting our time. Now, actually, it's the same algorithm. It's not the difference in the patients, it's the difference in the business model of that site. One was a busy teleradiology practice that was getting chunks of patients arriving every hour, and basically anything that slowed their radiologist down was a massive problem. And if you've got a false positive, that's going to take about an hour of follow-up as it moves through the general radiologist, the subspecialty radiologist, to the chief of section to confirm that there is no ICH here. Whereas for the other environment, they wanted to catch every single potential case, and it was all being read by a subspecialty, so it was okay. But just a real example of the fact that you need to measure that benefit, and sometimes you're surprised. And the key thing is to have multiple different options that can plug that gap, because you never know which of these products is going to be the right one for that particular site, with their data, with their clinicians, with their referrers, with their business.
Yeah, something I've learned many times the hard way in doing translational research is that technology is fantastic, but it requires people and process, right? You know, you can have a wonderful piece of technology that's just not going to be used. So the implementation, and I think that's where, again, this partnership between industry and the consumers of the product really need to understand and work together.
I was just going to comment on the ROI question a little bit. The flip side of that is the cost component. So in order to understand the ROI, you got to understand the cost. And the demand has been tremendous. So I remember back in 2015, which is not that long ago, there was this push away from the technology still. Keep the EHR and keep the technology away. When it comes to AI and some of the topics here, there's a demand that says, give it to me now. I want it faster. So the demand has changed. So much so that in products, even people will say, I want to put 10 or 15 or 20 algorithms in this product. So we started to model out the cost. And these are generic numbers. This came from, I think, a Medium article that says, when you were thinking about putting one algorithm into a product, think of it as about $100,000 of cost to produce that algorithm and put it in per algorithm, and then about $15,000 per user per algorithm per year to maintain. So if you're building a product or you are adopting it in a health system, you've got to factor in that these things have a life cycle and that they have a regular cost that you have to deal with. And so, and those numbers, again, are generic, but people will sometimes forget that each individual model is its own software with its own life cycle, just like a full-blown piece software package is.
Yeah, so I think the ROI piece is, interesting. I think we all agree it's about the trials, right? We go in, when it comes to AI, it's a prove it to me. Does it work? Does it add value? What's the ROI on this? Success, I think from even the vendors and AI providers, what industry leaders are looking for, what are we looking for to provide value to the customers, whether it be private outpatient care centers. It's much different than inpatient hospitals, right? In terms of not necessarily patient clinical value, but actually their goals and achievements, right? The outpatient imaging center market is a very competitive market in terms of referring physicians, things like that. So how can you take the same algorithm that we've spent so much time developing and also apply that to different areas of the market that have completely different, end goals? For example, imaging centers, follow-up cases, right? What do you do for radiologists, telerads, follow-up cases? That's much different than it would be in an inpatient setting, right? How can I notify the referring physician that, hey, there's a follow-up for this patient. We're going to go ahead and end that thing. And you take that, and depending on what region as well, those use cases and what we've done in our value have completely changed from imaging center to imaging center because the practice is managed differently, things are done differently. So it's all about trials, but as customers out there, as imaging centers or hospitals, what's your value? What are you looking to get out of, an algorithm or something like that? It's a great question, right? What are you looking for in terms of value? We can guess all day, but you're the experts out there.
Very valid discussion is the academic teaching and training aspect as well. And I've seen a different sort of feedback from different academic institutes here in the US, where the request has been either to embed it into the training program for resident radiologists, and in certain cases, restrict the AI results from year 1 and year 2 radiologist residents so that they can focus on their current training at the moment, and then they can assess how AI works. Yep. So it is evolving in terms of the ROI also from a clinical education perspective, if it helps or no.
No, absolutely. I think from the clinical education perspective, that's why you come to these meetings, right? And we do have, I have a module week-long and hands-on and so on that we do with our residents at Brigham and Women's and at Mass General. And we also have a rotation called the Clinical Data Science Pathway, which they can do in their senior year. And they spend a number of months with us at the center and do research and so on. But I also have an online curriculum, which is from leadership. We have to keep internal to all of MGB, but that's for all specialty staff and so on. And it's little recordings. You have to listen to me a lot, but it's recordings, it's hands-on exercises and so on. And the goal of it was really to teach people about machine learning and AI who don't know computer science and don't know math, and that's the target audience, so they can understand and use these technologies and know when they fail, because they do, and how to work with these technologies, and how to talk to our vendor experts and our data science experts. Again, team sport. So all very, very valid points. I want to switch gears here and be a devil's advocate here. You know, we've got cloud. Is this going to accelerate the clinical implementation of AI? Should I be afraid of having my mom's scan up in the cloud? Ben.
I love that you give me the answer first. You know what? The cloud is coming. I don't know what the timescale is. I think the absolute key is flexibility. That whatever you do now, you need a solution that can deal with now. And that's, for most people, on-premise, lots of caution about sending data up into the cloud. You also need a solution that can live with you as you go through the transition and be able to deliver when you're in the cloud, right? So, you know, we have to deal with all those different eventualities, and we do. And there are some vendors of AI products that are happy to be on-prem, some can only be in the cloud. You know, you just got to be completely abreast of that entire picture. And when a customer wants something, they might say, oh, I want that product from that vendor. And you say, well, it's only available through a cloud deployment, and you don't want that. Yeah, you're right, I don't want that, so we can't have that. And if you can then say, but you know what, you can solve that same clinical problem with this other product that's integrated just as well, but it's on-premise, why don't we go with that? And we also see sites who are very concerned about, you know, all of these AI products are great, but they're not quite there yet. I can't make the bet right now about which one is going to be the one that is good for me for the next 5 years. And actually, if you can make a platform approach, you don't have to make that bet today. You're deciding, right, I'm going to deploy a platform, I'm going to use that product. If that one turns out to be much better in a year's time, well, I'm just going to switch it around.
No, I think that's our next question is, you know, how and when do organizations decide to adopt these technologies? And, you know, we see the potential benefits, but, you know, you enter into a long-term agreement and it evolves. So, Dr. Gupta.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't think that cloud is always the answer for everything. So I'm in 100% agreement with you. And maybe I'm oversimplifying things, but I think, you know, there's really only 3 places you can do the work, process your AI or whatever. It's on the device, and we used to call that just installing your software. Now they give it a fancy name of edge computing. I mean, there's a little difference, but same thing, that you bring the processing to where the data is and the machine, your card is. Then on-prem. And so, you know, the benefit of on the device is it's fast. There's no latency. The drawback is that if I've got 100 carts, I've got to upgrade 100 carts. So you move to on-prem and you don't have that upgradability problem, but you've got a human resource that you're dedicating to maintaining this CapEx expense on site. So either it's your resource or it's a managed service. And now you've got cloud. So cloud says, okay, I don't even have to worry about that. Let somebody else worry about it. And so there's some benefit to it. There used to be some fear, especially with security, that as you raised, and I think it's flipped in the last couple of years. It used to be that I was afraid to put my medical records in the cloud because it'll get stolen. And there have been breaches in the health systems themselves. And they've said, I would rather have an enterprise security solution than have the cloud people responsible than myself. So there's security, but you do introduce some problems. One of the problems we're encountering early on is a latency problem. If we push an image to the cloud and start running AI, even if we're super fast, there could be a condition where somebody changes the source image and you have this race condition where they're mismatched. Other industries have solved that problem, you know, Dropbox and OneDrive, so we can solve those problems. But if you see all 3 scenarios, on the device, on-prem, on the cloud, it depends on the application. It's just different choices.
So you see a hybrid environment, and
yeah, I do. I mean, if you've got a mobile ultrasound cart in a rural area, I can't imagine cloud is going to be your solution unless the entire world's got satellite internet. If we're not there yet. Yeah.
Kevin.
Yeah, listening to Ben talking about it's what fits the now, right? I think currently there's many deployment models in cloud. I think there's a lot of benefits in cloud, from technological advances, manageability of version upgrades, compliance pieces. There's a lot of benefits there, but there are areas of not so much benefits. On-prem sometimes today is still the right application, and it depends what the customer wants, right? So now it's, do we have on cloud? I mean, do we have on-prem? Do we have cloud? I think it's what fits the application, right? But it's also, go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead. I was just going to say, from the old days of PACS, what kind of support do our vendors provide? Is there at the elbow support? Is there, what's...
Well, I'll tell you, cloud solutions, the support is a little bit easier for manufacturers to provide, even from simple upgradability of the application itself, whether it be the algorithms, you making one update and not, 100. But yesterday I attended the It's on Cloud session, and it was great. Larry from Canon, and this is not a plug for Canon, but he made an interesting comment, was we have to stop moving the data around to 15 different repositories, right? And I'm paraphrasing, don't quote me on it, but he said, let's bring the data to the patient, or the cloud to the patient. Bring the algorithm to the patient, so you're not, I have a stroke algorithm, I'm sending data to the cloud number one. I have chest algorithms to the cloud number two, right? Because there's not a suite of tools that does it all yet, right? So you're taking and duplicating data in a lot of places. And so bringing that from the cloud to the data is an interesting approach. He just took that and really thought about it last night a lot. It's a different approach, but could be onto something there.
I think that in an ideal world, sounds great. The real challenge there is that you've got really heavy compute requirements for some of these AI algorithms, right? And you can't just have a system sat in a hospital that's idle for 95, 99% of the time. And that's where the real strength of cloud comes in. And it's around the economics of how you deploy all these solutions at scale. So it's a lovely idea to not have to move data around, but I think the reality is that unless you want to be having your NVIDIA DGX, whatever it is, on the cart, it's going to be a challenge.
Depending on what the algorithm is, absolutely. And it's a great idea. Maybe I don't think we're going to solve that. It's a great idea. But yes, the algorithm in the cloud is so many benefits, right? The processing power being the biggest one, right? At scale, at load with many customers. So I think, it was just an interesting take yesterday on that approach. But you're right, how do we deduplicate data moving around everywhere is kind of a big issue in the industry right now.
Well, this has been a wonderful discussion. Let's open it up to questions from the audience. And if you would, please raise your hand, because we need you to speak into the mic. And Anna at the back can get you to the mic. So do we have any questions from the audience? We've answered all your questions. Anna, please, Steve, Dr. Horry. Anyone want to address that? Let's go down the line. No, Kevin, go ahead.
Yeah, I think tying definitely quality to the outcome is the benefit for many areas of what we're doing. I think the fee for service is an older model. I think that needs to be looked at in defining quality measures on every aspect, right? Not just reading things like that before reimbursement. I completely agree with that, and it does help. One, price a solution out better as well, because when you're up against the service fee for reimbursement, it's tough to price against that in value.
Dr. Ahmed.
I absolutely agree with you, and that is something that we have engaged with our early adopters as well, in terms of isolating the quantitative and qualitative data in regards to what KPIs we have identified and what outcomes we are monitoring. Because there are many claims that being made on retrospective data, a lot of sensitivity, specificity, AUC, and all those things. But what does it, like, so what? Like, what does it do in clinical practice? And fortunately, the sites that adhere to this science or methodology, they have agreed to identify some of those KPIs with us. I think gradually, as there is more adoption of AI in actual clinical practice, and if it is enforced by the providers to the vendors, that yes, we would be willing to contract with you, but if it includes these elements and metrics that we are monitoring as part of outcomes, I think that is what is going to facilitate with the business case also for building the value-based metrics in reimbursements.
This is a challenge that's familiar to me from the EHR world, which is you have solutions that work when you are in a value-based care quality world, but you still have to sell that solution in a fee-for-service world. So I think that's the challenge we have. But if you look at where the more of the venture capital money flowing into AI startups is going into startups that have some sort of automation or work reduction angle to it, more so than just clinical accuracy. And that is only really valuable, or that value gets unlocked in the value-based care quality world. Because when you are fee for service, then you are reimbursed for every intervention you do. And so it's different. Your incentive is to do more. And when you are capitated up front, let's say in the extreme scenario, I'm paid up front, and then I have to keep you healthy, then every time I do a read or every time I intervene, it's an expense. I would rather shift that expense to the tech as much as possible. So I think you're right. I think we're straddling two payment mechanisms still.
Yeah, I mean, I think that from us, we focus on the US market, but we have sales of third-party products in the UK, in Germany, in Italy, in Australia, in New Zealand, in South Africa, and all of these different models, we have to find a way through. And it's all about having a conversation with the site and trying to work out, okay, how do we make this work for you? There's a cost of this product. There's a value and a benefit that it brings to your practice. How can we square that circle? And, I can't sit here and say I can see the future of what US healthcare looks like and we're going to fit, but I can definitely pin down that there's value. And the challenge then is, how do we fit that value into whatever structure comes along?
Great. Question, please. The mic here, Anna. Kevin.
I think fire is a start. I really do. I think how do you exchange the data? Easy is the start. When you adopt it, APIs. That's basically what fire is, right? Is essentially a set of APIs built around the foundation of fire, and it does make it easy because you can do a lot with that to exchange data. And with applications, especially cloud-based applications or platforms itself, it does make it easy to communicate versus traditional DICOM data sets or standard HL7. So fire is definitely there, and I do think when you are communicating to EMRs or even a workflow solution from end to end, not just diagnostic imaging for the radiologist, we're talking clinicians, referring physicians, technologists, right, schedulers. Right? In the scheduling piece, how many people it takes to schedule an exam for one. So let's empower the patient to schedule their own by using AI, those types of things. And so how do you integrate nicely? And I think that's a step forward, is adoption of fire for sure.
Dr. Ahmed.
Yeah, absolutely agree with what Kevin said. I think we need to look at it from a clinical use case perspective as well, because when you think about interoperability with EHR data, today, there is a lot of data in EHR, but it's not intelligently linked to the radiomics or the image-based analysis that we are doing today. If you ask a radiologist, oh, well, this algorithm picked up a nodule, it's suspicious. Well, how do you know what else is going on with this patient? Well, the answer is, okay, you will go into the EMR and try to find what else is going on. If there is no EMR, then you will have to make a clinical judgment, or you don't know what you don't know about this patient. So is it then about fire or HL7 or integration, or is it maybe using NLP engines or something else to integrate or read into the data that resides into EHR and intelligently link that data? And I think that's the next phase where the clinical demand is actually diverting this discussion into that image pixel-based analytics is good. Automates measurements, you have all that. You can, instead of reading a CT chest in 12 minutes, you're now reading it in 6 or 7 minutes. But then there's other linkages as well, right? And that's where I think if we are able to address some of the clinical scenarios and use cases, then what integration layer, what APIs do we use, it becomes a secondary conversation.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with the use case driving the need for these things to come together. I think there's a really important use case, which is understand the full workflow and start to collect the metadata around the timings and what's happening in the workflow. So to me, this is one of the more brilliant modern concepts of modern software, which is collecting all the metadata of the clicks and things you do, and then using that data as sort of a indirect focus group to change the software or to go back and study it analytically to see where we can have improvements. So it's like the equivalent of the pop-up in Microsoft that says, hey, do you mind if I collect all of this data to improve the product? I don't think we do that a lot in imaging, but if we did that, and I don't know if these are the right metrics. I started studying this SIIM, this SIIM workflow something
it's called SOL now.
SOL, is it?
Yes.
Okay, trying to define what these parameters are to measure. But if, for example, patient arrival to image acquisition, let's say that was one, that bridges HL7 and DICOM. If I'm going from image read to report, that also bridges DICOM and HL7. So if I can collect all that data and start to report out on these metrics, then we can improve the industry overall with the software and with process improvement.
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, I think I go back to my previous comment. Standards are great, but without adoption, they're nothing. And we've got to get that adoption going.
All right. One last question for our panel. I'm going to ask each of you. What will the AI diagnostic or therapeutic device company of the future look like? How do you see this evolving? So,
a suite of tools, a suite for everything is really where I think we're all trying to get to. I think you'll have a niche. not saying that there can't be multiple companies doing different areas, and we should still continue to do that, areas of speciality, right? But I think, a chest suite, right, a stroke suite, things like that cover the full anatomy of that area. And I think, how we get there is I think a ways away. Compliance, everything, right? And there's some companies attempting this a lot, and I think they're doing well. But it's not just it's the accuracy, right? It's the data. How much data have we run through these algorithms to actually be able to provide a full suite? And I think that's where I see the future of this going, and to where there is open standards, to where we can do advanced details inside, whether I'm viewing image and interoperability between the two. If I need to make changes to something that as a radiologist, I don't agree with its finding, and then it can go back to the algorithm and also update that for learning. So, full kind of interoperability between AI and suites of tools.
Dr.
Very fascinating question. So I think from a solution provider's perspective, the first thing that we have to keep in mind is standards, absolutely the basics, right? This is no argument about it. But how do you go about making sure your system is flexible enough to provide the embedding of innovative opportunities for your users? That's something that we are trying to scale up as we move from an enterprise imaging portfolio perspective to embedding AI and other innovations. How do you do that? So if you think about the advanced visualization and CAD applications, now they are seamlessly embedded into your viewing platforms. So the question now is, will AI still stay as a standalone app store or marketplace in future, or would it become standard embedded application into your workflow? So that's something that we need to start thinking about. Then also, looking at AI from a systems and support and maintenance perspective, in terms of how intelligently you're embedding AI into your operations, so that you are more advanced in terms of systems follow-up with your customers, predict certain backlogs or other opportunities. The third aspect is related to how do you provide service, and the service and also follow up in terms of upgrades and functionality. There are a lot of applications being developed in whether it is imaging or pixel analytics, but it's all about bringing that together. So the question in the future will be, do I need a separate platform for AI, or should it be part of my native enterprise imaging platform? So that one consolidated systems approach, because that's what we saw, consolidation of image service lines with enterprise imaging. So multitude of AI applications, hundreds of AI startups and developers, will they be consolidating on a separate platform, or would they be part of your ecosystem that you have invested as a hospital or a solution provider?
Dr. Gupta.
Yeah, this is probably commenting more on how AI companies that we see here are going to evolve. I think a lot of parallels to pharmaceutical and device companies. I think just like we see a Medtronic or a Pfizer, we're going to see the equivalent with software medical devices. And I think there's 5 big areas they invest in to bring products to market. I think we're seeing 3 major investments. We're seeing investment in discovery and development, but instead of human and animal trials, we're using training data to do it. We already see the investment in regulatory approval and attempting to get reimbursement, just like those industries. We're already seeing manufacturing at scale, but not physical product. It's deployment through platforms that's happening. The other 2 I predict are going to come, which is the making your claims, advertising, and hopefully more responsible than the pharma industry, so that they don't need a promotional regulatory team to make sure it's fair and balanced, but they stay balanced in their claims. And medical affairs, having people being able to answer the scientific questions about the models that are out there, and being able to sponsor med ed or independent investigators to study it. I think it's going to be a third branch of these other intervention companies that we have.
Excellent.
Yeah, I think all of that sounds right. I think that the piece for me, if I'm going true visionary, there's the value you bring within the imaging environment, be that radiology, cardiology, pathology, ophthalmology, right? We see AI going on in all those different areas. And in fact, we have a platform that delivers value in all of them. But the key thing is it's not inside that imaging department where all this value is being accrued. It's moving it down into the referrer, into the health system, into the payer. And if you want to think about the kind of the 10-year vision, where do these companies all end up? you've got to be delivering value there, and you need a coherent infrastructure in order to deliver it. And that's not limited to a imaging department. It's certainly not limited to radiology. It's trying to work out how you get all of the information that you're pulling out with AI from the raw data. How do you combine that with the radiologist, the pathologist, the ophthalmologist reporting? And how do you drive that value downstream and really have the impact for patient outcomes? And I don't think we do that yet, but that's got to be the vision for where we get to, moving things away from just an imaging department.
Well, fantastic, very insightful comments. I'd like to thank our panel for a great discussion.